time when Rob was diagnosed, Rob didn't really have any idea, and when Rob was first diagnosed, he said it'll be okay, everything will be okay, and I was the one that, but this is not going to be okay, because I know the journey that we lay ahead. I'd seen patients with MND. Over time, I accepted the diagnosis. I knew that Rob was going to fight the prognosis, but I accepted that this is the cards that we've been dealt, this is what we're dealing with. The hard part, the emotional part for me and for Rob as well, was the children, and knowing that Rob was such a hands-on family man, that he wasn't going to be here to see the children finish school, graduate, walk them down the aisle, is the most heartbreaking thing of all for me.
Our guest today is an extraordinary person. She's an NHS physiotherapist. She's a mother of 3 children, and she has inspired a lot of people through her selfless commitment to, her husband, Rob Burrow, and the rugby league legend as he was. She cared for throughout his heroic battle with motor neuron disease. She's written an extraordinary book about her time so far. Her name is Lindesy Burrow, and she's welcome to the top of the tower, as we say today. Lindesy, lovely to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Lovely to meet you too.
And thanks for being with us today. We could go to so many different places and so many obvious places in some ways, but I think what I'd love to do is get a little sense, if you don't mind, about your life when you were young and you met this boy, because you were only kids at the time.
Yes.
For the first time, and do you think you knew then, this guy's great, or did you just think, who's this fella?
No, I think, Rob and I were childhood sweethearts. We met as teenagers, and I think I knew straight away that Rob was the one for me. He was the one. I think now as a mum, as a parent, Rob would be the kind of child that, future husband that you'd want your children to bring home, because he was kind, he was caring, family was at the heart of everything that he did. He was such a family man, devoted to his family, devoted to the children. Rob would often spend time at his granddad's after rugby training, his parents, because he was so family orientated, and I don't think anyone ever had a bad word to say about Rob. He was just genuinely a nice, lovely guy.
What a smart girl you were, that you were able to see so far into the future at that young age, to say this guy is great, so, but you also knew from the get-go this was somebody you wanted to spend more time with and be with, and as time went on, obviously when you got together and became married and had children and so forth, how would you describe your relationship, and as a family, as a husband, wife, and then as parents?
So in many ways I think Rob and I were a bit like chalk and cheese. I was the organised one. I had to-do lists literally everywhere, whereas Rob was so laid back. He was horizontal, but he was always on time.
I love that expression. I think everyone listening in can relate to what you just said, but go on.
So he was, he was always on time, but I was a practical one. I was the one that sorted everything out, and I think in probably many ways I was like a mum to Rob. I would help him get his kit ready. I would do all his meals. I remember when we first got together and I was at university at the time, Rob was living on his own, and he would have garlic bread and chips for his tea most nights. He would put the dishwasher on to wash at one plate. I think at one point he actually paid his mum to come and clean for us, because he wasn't the most domesticated, but no, I was just so fortunate to be in Rob's wife for so many years, and I knew Rob's family growing up, so I'd actually danced with Rob's sisters, so I knew the family well. I knew that they were from a lovely family, very grounded. I think the family values that they had in terms of kindness, caring, those were the kind of the real true family values that Rob stood by, and I think he wanted to kind of pass them on to our children,
of course,
just to bring them up to be kind and caring and just generally good people.
I'm going to say this because I think it's because you won't. From the brief moment I've met you, you're also a very good person and a very kind person. And I'd say if Rob's family were here today, they'd say that. And I'm not speaking for them, but just as a person who doesn't know you, but having looked at your book and looked at your story and looked at your life, I think you were lucky to have each other. If I may intercede at this point and say that, I hope you accept that.
That's very kind. Thank you.
It's a true story. And you got into the medical world, career-wise. Can you tell us why and what drove that? Where did that come from?
Yes, initially growing up, I actually wanted to be a PE teacher. My brother played football and used to have to go training, once a week, and I got sort of dragged along to watch him train.
Sure.
And then sort of decided actually with a PE teacher I'd have to be out in all weathers, and that didn't really appeal to me. So I thought, actually, do you know what? I'm interested in the human body. I'm interested in anatomy. Quite like the medical side of things. So kind of physio was just sort of a natural progression. So I trained in Manchester, qualified in 2004, and I've worked in the NHS for over 20 years now as a physiotherapist.
And do you enjoy that work, or is it a challenge, or how would you describe your...
Yeah, I love my job. No 2 days ever the same. I think that's just my personality. I like helping people, and obviously I wanted to go down into the caring profession, wanted to help people get back after injury or illness. So yeah, I do enjoy my job. I find it very rewarding, and I think it's helped massively with Rob's battle. I think good and bad. The good parts is I think it gave me some insight as to kind of what was the journey that we were going on. At the time when Rob was diagnosed, Rob didn't really have any idea, and when Rob was first diagnosed, he said it'll be okay, everything will be okay, and I was the one that, but this is not going to be okay, because I know the journey that we lay ahead. I knew I'd seen patients with MND, so I think initially I took the diagnosis, probably it hit me harder, I would say, than Rob initially, just because I think I had some insight as to the journey that lay ahead.
I'm going to come to that moment, if I may, Lindsay, in due course. Not just yet. I still want to get back 2 steps. Mm-hmm. And this is me being nosy. How did the proposal for the wedding go? And why did you just almost shake your head at me there? Because was it awful, or was it funny, or what happened?
No, it says it in the book. I do feel quite bad now, actually, because...
No, just tell us what happened. Don't give us how emotionally distraught you are about writing about it in the book. Tell us about the proposal.
So we went to Euro Disney, and I kind of had an inkling that Rob was going to propose after he'd asked me what my ring size was.
That's going to give you an idea, isn't it?
Yeah, there was a slight subtle hint there. So I'd measured my finger with a tape measure. I was only a teenager at the time, and we hadn't been actually dating that long, so I'd sent him sort of the measurements, and then he'd come out and he'd got this big box in his pocket, and we were in the Rainforest Cafe having lunch, and he got down on one knee, and I just said, get back up. I was just so embarrassed, and then I thought afterwards, oh crikey, I've blown my chance here, he's never going to ask me again. But fortunately he plucked up the courage that evening and proposed, and obviously said yes. Okay, so
take 2 in that regard. Yes. And the wedding was obviously beautiful, and honeymoon?
Yes, went to the Maldives. So very lucky to have, it was just paradise. Yeah. It just felt like it was just Rob and I on the island, and it was great. I think anyone that's getting married or knows the planning, the stress that goes into a wedding, I think to have that time where it was just there was nothing to do was brilliant. After the stress of organising the wedding, not that Rob had much to organise, I have to say.
I'd say he barely organised his tie.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think you've given us a picture here, and I've no doubt
I'm the bossy one, and he's
well, you say boss, I say organised. You don't be harsh on yourself. Let's face it, you got to get some credit for all those phone calls and emails. Okay, and then children came along, which is beautiful. Tell me about your children.
Yeah, just so fortunate to have 3 beautiful children. They wake up every day with big smiles on their face, and they're the reason that we keep going, and that Rob wanted us to be happy. Rob lived for the children, he idolised the children, and I think in many ways they're just like Rob, the brave, the courageous, and how they've handled the last 10 months since Rob's passing is just, I think, a credit to Rob and to us as a family. I think they've shown true bravery.
And tell us their names for those who don't know. So
we've got Macy, who's 13, she's our eldest daughter. Then we've got Maya, who's 10 years old, and we've got Jackson, who's 6.
Okay, that's a lovely mix, isn't it, of ages and characters and personalities and all sorts of stages of growth as well, which is really sweet. Lindsay, we're going to talk about that dark time when after such an amazing career on the rugby pitch, things changed in both of your lives and the rest of your family's lives, when obviously the doctors told you, listen, this is not good. You, as a healthcare worker, had the insight, as you described a moment ago, in a way that maybe Rob mightn't have, in terms of the impact of being told that it's not good. Mm-hmm. What were the initial physical, if you like, hints that everything wasn't quite right?
Yeah, so Rob had finished playing rugby and had gone into a coaching career, and he was coach at the time, was just having difficulty articulating certain words. And I remember we were moving house, and saying the word solicitor. He was struggling to say it, and he was slow in his speech, and I think a few people had picked up on that and had questioned whether he was doing something. Rob wasn't a drinker, he didn't do anything that he shouldn't do, he was very by the book, looked after his health. So I think we had a bit of an inclination that there was something not quite right, but it initially manifested itself in its speech. I think because Rob had played rugby, he'd had a few head injuries throughout his career. The club, Leeds Rhinos, quite quickly sent him to see a neurologist, and he had a battery of tests. So he had an MRI scan, blood tests, and then the nerve conduction studies were ultimately, the tests that led to the diagnosis, because they'd shown some abnormalities. In terms of actual physical symptoms, what Rob had was called fasciculations. It's like twitching of the muscles, and that was really prevalent. You'd be kind of just sat next to Rob and you could feel kind of his muscles twitching. But it was his speech, kind of how it manifested itself clinically. But there were other signs that things were not quite right.
Things were they were out of character, and they were kind of bothering you. Were you told together about the diagnosis?
Yeah, we were. We'd had some of the results back initially, so we'd had the MRI scan back, and we'd had the bloods back, and they were all clear. So going into that appointment, we felt quite optimistic that he would be given the all clear, and then they were actually looking at a condition called myasthenia gravis, which is a problem that affects the speech muscles. So we were quite optimistic that we'd been given some medication and be told, we'll sign you off, things will be okay. So I think to go into that room and be told that you have motor neuron disease and you've got a life expectancy of 1 year to 2 years was just devastating and life-changing. Where
did you go after that?
Just wanted to get out of the room. We were offered to go and speak to a nurse, but I just wanted to get home. I just wanted to, to get out of the building, and I just wanted to go. We got in the car, and as I say, Rob was a tower of strength. He was the one that sort of held it together and said everything will be okay. Rob's one of the first things that Rob actually said to me was, thank goodness it was him and not me or the children. So to have had that diagnosis and then Rob turn around and say something like that, that will always live with me, that he said that. And we had to go and break the news to obviously Rob's parents and my parents, and later the children. But we had to get his head around the news itself initially. I think that was the most difficult part, was how we're going to tell the children, what are we going to tell the children, because we didn't have a lot of the answers. And I think a lot of people that are in that situation don't have the answers.
Or the language.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, the language, and I'm not just talking about the children. Mm-hmm. How do you tell a parent your son is going to die long before he should, or daughter, obviously? So it's not, and whatever about the children, which of course is a totally other level of horror, trying to explain where this is going to go. How do you come up with how do you conjure up the words or the sentences to do that? Did you plan it like you were going into some sort of desperate meeting, or did you just go in and ad-lib it and see what came out?
Yeah, it was just, I don't think you can ever prepare for those moments, and how do you prepare? It was Rob that made the phone call. We got in the car and he said we knew that his parents were waiting at home along with his sisters for the news. They knew that we were going to the consultation. And Rob was particularly worried about his dad. His dad had his health issues, and he said, this'll kill my dad. I think in many ways it gave Rob's dad, Jeff, purpose, because he became the head of research in the Burrow household. So he was researching all about M&D trials and studies, and sort of threw a lot of his energy into doing that, because I think, like many of us, we felt helpless. We felt helpless that we couldn't help Rob, but we just tried to do what we could to make his time with us as comfortable as possible, and keep him with us as long as possible. Yeah, I do understand that. Listeners from Ireland will remember Charlie Bird, a very famous Irish journalist who I spoke to a couple of times on the Late Late Show. But initially, when he was diagnosed with MND, he came on the show and his voice was starting to go, but it wasn't gone. And when somebody whose job is to be to speak, a voice becomes even more remarkable and sad in some ways. And he was very angry, and he was very angry with the diagnosis. He was very angry with premature death as a prospect. Did anger come into your lives at all, or how did you handle the bad days? I think there was frustration. I think, when you're told you've got a disease that's incurable, it's life limiting, and then you ask, well, is there no treatment? There's not a cure for this disease. You kind of think, why isn't there a treatment? Why isn't there a cure? It feels unfair. Yeah, why has this happened? But I think it was Rob's positivity that kept me going, because he didn't feel sorry for himself. There was never any self-pity. He was just, this is the card that I've been dealt. He put it down to pure and simple bad luck that he'd been diagnosed with MND, and he just wanted to live each and every day to its fullest. And I think that is such, it's been a life lesson for me, things that I would moan about. And I think, you look at what Rob was going through and the challenges that he faced, and he never complained, he never moaned once, he never said, why me? And I just think that's so incredible that he had such a positive mindset despite the challenges that he faced.
Yes.
And he was a face of the MND community, in the most difficult of circumstances. So I'm, just hugely in admiration for Rob, and he was such a huge inspiration. And
well, that's the thing. I'm going to echo just one more time that gentleman I mentioned, Charlie Bird, who came on the show another time. And he was a new man because he accepted where it's going. Yes. And not only that, he raised a lot of money for research for motor neurones. We all went up a big mountain, Crowpatrick, together. He got the Irish people all going up there, and even the people who couldn't metaphorically went up the mountain. But this is where you came in, and your family, and the fact that you got together and said, right, this is what's happening. Rob obviously leading the way in terms of let's make some money for charity, and try and let's sort of the research like your father-in-law. And this is the word I'm going to light on. My favourite word that's come out of your mouth today, and I say this with great respect, is purpose. Because there's no point in wasting time, energy and everything else. Purpose, and that's what you appear to have done as a family. You decided, let's give this a reason, let's give ourselves a reason. Purpose. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Rob wanted to show people the reality of living with MND and how it affects not just the person but the whole family. I think what Rob has achieved and the likes of Charlie and the late Doddy Weir and Stephen Darby, or other players that have used the platform to kind of raise that awareness. Amazing. People now know what MND is.
Yes.
I think to date, Rob and his good friend Kevin Sinfield, former team friend of Rob's, have raised over £20 million now for MND charities, which is just phenomenal. And
it really is.
It really is.
It's a lot of money.
Will make such a difference to families, and ultimately that's what Rob wanted to help. He wanted to help families that are in a situation. He never wanted another family to go through what our family has gone through. And Rob was such a private family man, and I think for him to go and share his story to the world at a time when he was at his most vulnerable takes a really special, courageous person to do that.
No question. The cruelty of MND is how a once strong lion is reduced physically, only physically.
Yes.
Not emotionally, not mentally, not in terms of the heart and soul, just physically, just the shell. I would often describe it as being like a house and the lights are being turned off one by one. I'm sure you've heard that before. And you see it in your book, and you can see it evidentially just looking at him as he is heading towards the end. Did that make it harder, or did that give you a sense of urgency? Tell me about that, as you could physically almost see him heading for the end of days.
Yeah, Rob was always such a positive mindset. He never liked talking. It was always a difficult conversation to have with Rob, because
didn't want to get into it.
He didn't want to get into it. And I remember once a consultation with his consultant, Dr. Jung, in Leeds, and she'd said, we need to kind of think about the future and planning. And she said, would you plan for a game? And Rob said, yeah, but I wouldn't plan for a game 6 weeks in advance. I would plan for the here and now. So he always had an answer for everything. And I think Rob, when the time came, he said probably about a week before, I'm finding it difficult to fight MND. And that was the point that I knew that he was struggling. Yeah. Because he never complained, he never moaned, but to hear him say, he communicated via an eye gaze machine, and he put that on the machine, that I'm finding it hard to fight MND, and I knew that fight was soon going to be over.
You can prepare as much as you feel you can, and particularly for your children, I'm thinking of here, I'm not to take away from your own grief, but for the younger ones, to say goodbye. You often wonder, would you rather something sudden happen, or would you rather a longer goodbye in life? How was that for everyone? How difficult was that those final days and hours?
I think for me personally, the grief started at the point when Rob was diagnosed. I think that was the hard part for me, and over time I accepted the diagnosis. I knew that Rob was going to fight the prognosis, but I accepted that, this is the cards that we've been dealt. This is what we're dealing with. The hard part, the emotional part for me and for Rob as well, was the children. And knowing that Rob was such a hands-on family man, that he wasn't going to be here to see the children finish school, graduate, walk them down the aisle, is the most heartbreaking thing of all for me. Prior to Rob's death, I remember just being sat up. I knew he wasn't eating, he was sleeping a lot of the time, was less communicating. Obviously he used a technology device to communicate. His messages didn't really make sense anymore. He was obviously struggling a lot. And I remember being up in the night just researching, on the Child Bereavement UK, how am I going to deal with this? What am I going to tell the children? And the policy that we adopted right from day one was to be honest with the children. It was difficult because they were all at different ages, but I never wanted the children to say, Mummy, you said Daddy was going to get better. I think we had the policy of we'll be honest with them, and we were honest with them right up until the very end. And at that last point the children were there, Rob was surrounded by his family, by the people he loved the most and who loved him the most, and he went really peacefully, which gives me comfort that the children were there to be able to say the goodbyes, and have those memories, have those time with Rob. And the evening before he passed, we painted his fingers and did some little prints, took some locks of his hair. Rob was still with us at that point. He was very drowsy, very sleepy, but we got to say our final goodbyes. And I think in many ways that for me is more comforting than losing somebody unexpectedly, suddenly, because we knew it was going to happen, and we had that time, we made those memories as a family, and that is what I look back on now, and that is what gives me hope, and knowing that Rob had had enough, he'd fought his battle, and when you love somebody you don't want to see them suffer.
It was time. How are the kids?
They're really good, thank you.
They're doing okay, because it's so
really
fresh
well.
and so recent. It's only yesterday in your hearts. I understand that. And they're doing okay, and they're really talking
well. Yes, and we've tried to keep that. We talk about Rob and keep his memory alive, and I think me, I'm very much kind of a glass half full. I always put a smile on my face, and I think sometimes I was quite avoided telling the children how I felt, but actually I've learned that it's okay not to be okay, and to say to the children, I've been sad today because I heard this song on the radio, or that reminded me of Daddy, and it just gives them then the opportunity to say,
Me too.
I'm struggling as well.
Me too. What a lovely way of putting it. How are you, by the way?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. I'm doing okay. I'm running the London Marathon on Sunday.
I know, congratulations.
And then I'm running the Leeds Marathon 2 weeks later. So
is
that has
all?
given
Not
me
just the
not
two.
Just one.
Yeah, well, that's disappointing. I was hoping it'd say 3, but there you go. We can only do so much. God, you're letting yourself down there, Lindsay. That's a pity. What a way to end the interview. No, you're amazing. Do you know what I love about you as well? Apart from your attitude, as you say, the pint half full. I love that. There are two schools of people listening in today. One are the carers who do extraordinary work who are paid, and the other is the carers who do extraordinary work who are not paid. And I think that's very important to your heart as well, to acknowledge that, having experienced that. And those who are not paid is not to put down the ones who are. They're important people, no doubt. But those who aren't paid, I think, often feel not so much aggrieved, but certainly less seen.
Yes.
And you'd like to shine that light on, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. One of the reasons the book is called Take Care, it has care at the heart of it. And really what I wanted to do with the book was to shine a light on the amazing work that carers do. The carers in this country save the NHS £162 billion a year, which is the equivalent.
Say that number again.
£162 billion a year, which is the equivalent of another NHS service.
Mad.
So without these people that are doing it out of love, they're doing it because they care, our health and social care system would be non-existent. They are keeping the backbone of our society, and are keeping the country going.
They need to be told that they are seen and heard. Isn't that
Absolutely.
part of it? Lindsay, congratulations on your beautiful book, Take Care. As you say, it's a memoir of love, family, and never giving up. And you've given yourself and your family great purpose. And I think a lot of our listeners will be very inspired by what you've said today. And small things are much smaller than they realise when they read this book and hear your story. And I can't wish you and your family enough great love and good luck in the future. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Virgin Radio.